Howdy. Howdy. How's everybody doing? Great. My name is John Henriksen. I'm an alcoholic. Hi, John. My sobriety date is April 7th of 1983, and I am the most surprised person in the room that I've made it this far. Yeah. I want to thank the committee and whoever had the good grace to invite me down here, and I've looked forward to this since last November, I believe, when I was asked. And I've been doing this a long, long time. When they get a judge sober, you know, it's kind of an oddity. And by the way, if three guys in the back that have got outstanding warrants, you don't have to sneak out the back. I don't have any jurisdiction down here, so there's always that in the room. I'm not really a speaker, even though I've been doing this since I was 6 months sober. My sponsor told me I had to speak at a local speakers meeting up in Washington State. And I asked my sponsor, Don, I said, what do you do at a speakers meeting? I'd never been to one. I was 6 months sober, but I didn't know what you did. And he said, well, you got to be funny, John. If you're not funny, they ain't going to ask you back. So I went home, got a bunch of tapes of other speakers and memorized all their stuff, and that's what I did. And, I have, and this is not, this is a reminder. I have been all over the world talking at conventions and roundups, 37 states in our beautiful country, every province in Canada, England, Scotland, Ireland, and Mexico City. And everywhere I go, it's like walking into my home group. My home group is the Other Bar in Gladstone, Oregon. And now I have a new California group that I've never been to, and that's the No Name group. I love the energy from those guys. On my travels, I get very uncomfortable. The speakers that we've had this weekend have just been wonderful. Matt and Jennifer and Larry. Did I miss one? Nope, that's the three, and they were just terrific. Everybody's different. Everybody has a way of telling their story. I get very uncomfortable when I hear somebody talk, and it takes 45 minutes to tell me what it used to be like, and 5 minutes about what it's like now. I like to do the reverse. I like to spend 5 minutes to tell you what it used to be like. And I'll try to talk as fast as Jennifer did last night, but boy, wasn't she terrific, though? Wow. Yeah. I was born and raised in Seal Beach, California, where the sewer meets the sea. It's a beautiful little town down there. And I grew up very tall, very fast. And when I was 13 years of age, I was 6'3", weighed 124 pounds, and had trouble walking. Very uncoordinated. I had size 12 shoes. And ladies, there is absolutely no truth to the rumor. And I felt different all of my life. And I was 13, and nobody liked me, especially the girls. They didn't like me at all. And I snuck into the barn one time, and my grandfather cured rock and rye whiskey in the barn. Anybody know what rock and rye is? That's 100 proof old Yellowstone whiskey with rock candy strings soaking in them. Tastes pretty sweet, but it sure gets the job done. And I stole the quart out of the barn that day and pitched a tent out in the farm amongst the corn and with two other little guys. And I poured them a cocktail. And they drank that and giggled and fell down and went to sleep. I drank the rest of that quart. I can tell you what it smelled like. It smelled like warm red licorice. I can tell you what it tasted like. It tasted like warm red licorice. And I can tell you what it did for me. It made me fit in my own skin. In 15 minutes after that first slug went down my guts, I was going to be 200 pounds. I was going to be the best athlete that high school had ever seen. And I was going to have all the girls, not just the good-looking ones, but all the girls. I was going to do all of that stuff in the first 15 minutes. And I kept drinking that stuff, and along about midnight, I started throwing up. Every 15 minutes until in the morning I was throwing up blood and it got on my sneakers. And my folks were non-drinkers, and they took me to the doctor. Doctor didn't ask me anything about drinking. They were concerned about the blood I got in my sneakers. And you would think if the first time you ever got drunk at 13 years of age and you were throwing up blood all night, that you'd never want to do that again. Man, I couldn't wait to do it again. And every time I got a chance, until I was 41 years old, I went after that feeling. And I got that feeling for a long, long time. Until one day, I was sitting at a bar. And she poured me a big drink, whatever brown stuff I was drinking at the time. And nothing happened. And I complained to her, and I told her, what the hell did you put in this thing? And she poured me another one, and then the third one. And I got off the stool to go to the bathroom, and I fell flat on my ass. The feeling was lost forever. And I spent the next 3 years trying to stop drinking, and I could not stay stopped. So that's my story. I have been married 3 times. I have 5 children. I just found my oldest son 3 months ago. He lives in Southern California. When I was in high school, I had a girlfriend, and she got pregnant, and the families decided that they would give that child up for adoption. And God put in someone's ear the idea that they should have this internet thing. So they developed this internet, and then he put another idea in somebody else's ear, and they started this, what do they call that stuff? What? Ancestry. That went on. And he knew he was adopted, and he wanted to find his parents. And I got a letter. Said that I was a 97.8% match to him, and I thought it was a scam. And, so I reluctantly wrote him back, and he sent me a picture. And it looked like I was his twin. Wow. There was no... And I've talked to him several times. We have not met yet. But I have a new son. And I am so very grateful to God for putting those ideas to create what happened in my life. I didn't mean to get serious like that right away. I'm not really a speaker. You can diagram the principles of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous on a chart, and I won't get it. But you tell me a story that contains that principle in it, I'll get it. So I've been telling stories for a long, long time. And the one I love the best is Sacramento River is real close by, right? And there was an untreated old guy. He was a drunk. And he'd walk off his hangover every morning on the Sacramento River, on the banks there. And one day he tripped over a log, and on the other side of the log was a lamp that was all crusty and covered with sand. And he began to brush it off, and a genie pops out of this lamp. And she looks at the little drunk and says, I don't grant 3 wishes. I grant 1 gift and 1 wish. And the gift is my choice, and I look and I see that you must be a drinking man. And I was wondering, what is your favorite type of alcohol? The little drunk thought for a minute, and he says, I'm completely enamored with that stuff comes from Canada. Canadian Crown Royal. And she says, okay, you're drooling down here. What do you do with that? She says, okay, sir, and she waves her hand across the banks of the Sacramento River, and a giant bottle of Canadian Crown Royal appears. And she tells him that this bottle has magic powers. It will never go empty. And he thought he'd test that out, uncorks it, takes a big slug off of it, puts it back on the bank of the river, and watch it gurgle up, brim full. He does that a couple more times, and it filled right back up. She says, okay, sir, what is your wish? I will grant you anything I have the power to give you. And he thought for a minute, and he said, give me another one of those. That's as good as I can do it. In the old days, that's for sure. I have a beautiful sponsor who died on the eve of my 30th birthday in Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't give my sobriety date, did I? April 7th of 1983. And I'm 35 years and 9 months and 18 days, but who's counting? And I'm just delighted to be here. And my sponsor, he was from Brooklyn, New York, and his parents were from Sicily, and he was about that wide and about that tall, and they threw a net over me in 1983. The lady I was married to at the time, she called the Oregon Judicial Fitness Commission, because I was a judge since 1979. And they said, yes, can we help you? And she says, there's a drunk judge living in my house. Come and get the son of a bitch. And they did. They sent my sponsor to me, who was also a lawyer. And Don was 11 years sober at the time. And he said, get in a car. That's what I thought my name was after a while, because that's all he ever told me. Get in a car. And they dumped me in a beautiful treatment center in downtown Portland, Oregon. And on my real first day of sobriety, I met a man who helped save my life. First day of my sobriety. And he's here tonight. And amongst all you folks, I want to thank Mike for my sobriety, sir. Thank you. And where was I? Let me start over here. If I didn't mention, I am 76 years old. Getting in a little trouble walking up and down stairs these days. I still practice law. I love you guys, and they're still committing drunk driving cases out there, and I get a hold of these guys, and I have a meeting in my office, which is my home group, every Friday night at 6, and I do the same thing that my sponsor did to me. Every single night he would show up, get in a car, he would drag my ass to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Different one every night. There's 200 meetings in the Portland area every day. And when I was about 6 months sober, I got up enough courage to ask Don. I said, Don, Jesus, how many of these meetings I got to go to? And he looked at me and he said, we've looked at your case, kid. And we've decided you only have to go to meetings on the days that you drink. I said, yeah, but that's every day. So for 35 years, 9 months and change, I have only missed 72 meetings in all that time. That isn't what kept me sober. I struggled for 17 years of my sobriety. I went to a meeting every day. I sponsored people. I tried to do the best thing I could every day. I had done the steps in that treatment center. And every 5 years, my life would fall apart. When I got to you in Alcoholics Anonymous on April 7th of 1983, I was $652,000 in debt. And there was no way out. And I did what I was told. I made arrangements. I talked to people that I owed money to. And this, you may not believe, but when I was 1 year sober, I was debt-free. Debts were forgiven. I made arrangements for payments. I did everything I was supposed to do. And then every 5 years thereafter, my life would go in the tank again. I would had a law practice, and all the guys that were in my little office were sober members of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And they decided they wanted to go do something else, and they left, and I was stuck with the office debts one more time. And that first 5 years, I got served with divorce papers. I had to pay support. Call my sponsor and say, what do I do? He said, you do what you're told. First thing you do is you pay your child support. Okay? I did that. I never missed a payment. The next thing you do is that you go to a meeting and you don't drink. Okay, I can do that. And I would dig my way out. 10 years go by. I get served with divorce papers again. Seems as how being married and having a future wife on the side is not a good idea. Not a good idea. And there's another divorce. I'm back in the hole again, and got to dig out for the debts that I had. And then I found another lady, got married again, and this time I'm 17 years sober. I got served with divorce papers after 14 months. Called my sponsor, and he said, I haven't a clue what you do. Just why don't you try not getting married anymore? So I had a little trouble with the first page of chapter 5. Anybody ever wonder why Bill didn't just say honesty instead of rigorous honesty? You know the difference between being honest and rigorously honest? This will piss a few of you off, but that's the way it is. That's my job in Alcoholics Anonymous now, is pissing people off. Honesty is admitting that at one time in your life, you engaged in masturbation. Rigorous honesty, on the other hand, is admitting you still do. You know, that's the... So I guess Bill wanted us to be really, really honest. There were 3 guys raised their hand right back there. So when I got served those divorce papers, I was 17 years sober. And this time I didn't call my sponsor. I didn't. I was through with you people. Picking up a drink was never in my plan at all. But wanting out of the emotional pain that I got myself into every 5 years became paramount in my life. And this is where my story changes from what I used to do from this podium. I went to see my second wife for the sole purpose of getting some sympathy from her because of the divorce I was about to get again. But the real reason I was there was that she used to be a private investigator, and she carried a gun in her purse. And I told her my tale of woe, and she wished me well. And as I left the kitchen, I put my hand in her purse and took the gun. Drove back to my office in Gladstone, Oregon, 10 o'clock at night, on a Friday, February 15th of the year 2000. I cocked that gun, and I had every of my soul being, I wanted out of that pain, that emotional pain that we get into. And I said my last prayer of desperation, and I hope I never have to say another one. I screamed through my tears. I said, God, where are you? And the phone rang. And I looked at the phone. I said, it can't be. And I sheepishly picked up the phone and said, hello. And God said his name was Tom, and he was calling me from Camas, Washington. There was an old-timer up there, and he said, John, I heard about the wife, and he started to laugh. I understand you're in some pain, kid. I said, yes, Tom, I am. He said, you want to get out of that pain? I said, I'll do whatever you tell me to do. And he said, and you put the gun down and you come over to the house. And I had not told him that I had a gun. And I put it down, got in my car, drove to Camas, Washington. He was 41 years sober. He lived 5 more years. And he lived in a little tiny house. He lived on $650 a month Social Security disability. Was in a wheelchair. I went into his house and back to his little wood shop. And he had a big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he threw it at me. And I caught it. He said, you know what that is, John? I said, yeah, Tom, it's the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, I'm surprised you even know what the name of it is. Because you don't know a damn thing about that book. You don't know anything about the God that exists for us in Alcoholics Anonymous. And my training as a defense attorney popped up. And I started to argue with him, and I gave up very quickly. And I said, Tom, what do I do? He said, kid, you start over. You're going to do the one thing that very few people that are sober in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous ever do. I said, what's that, Tom? He said, on every page of that book, there's at least one question. And I'm supposed to answer every question that's in that book. He looked at me and he said, do you believe that Bill and Bob told you the truth in that book of ours? I said, yeah, I believe they told us the truth. He said, then wouldn't you like to duplicate what they did to see if you can get the results that they describe? Because you haven't done it yet, John. And I was coming up on 18 years of sobriety. And he hooked me up with 4 guys. And they took me through that book of ours, one gold-filled page at a time. I answered every question on every page. You know how many prayers are in the first 164 pages? Everybody knows that, right? You got the 3rd-step prayer and a 7th-step prayer. That's what most people think is in that book. There are 53 prayers in the first 164 pages. 53 of them. Every one of them is asking God to do something, or we're thanking God for having done something for us. Every single prayer. Anybody know what the 1st-step prayer is? Dear God, please remove the obsession to drink. Ever heard of that one? That's the 1st-step prayer. The original people, and Bill and Bob, found out that when asked, the God that exists for each of us in our own way of understanding, when asked to do something, never says no. Always says yes. God, of my understanding, doesn't wear a watch, however. But he always says yes. Always says yes. And I got to that chapter 4, that wonderful step that's ignored. Everybody thinks that we find God in the 3rd step, and that isn't where it is at all. There are 3 prayers in the 2nd step of our program. Getting serious, aren't I? Pissing you off yet? Yeah. Okay. We'll get back to the funny stuff in a minute. And I had to answer this question. It's right in the middle of that chapter. They looked at me and they said, John, is God everything or is he nothing? What's your answer to be? And I wanted to be part of the group, and I said, well, God's everything. And they said, turn the page, John. Turn the page. And they asked me to write down 5 things that I would not give up for a better relationship with God. I said, I don't understand. They said, we'll ask you the questions. Would you give up ever having another loving and caring relationship with a woman? I knew they were talking about sex. For a better relationship with God. I said, what are you, nuts? No. Would you give up your children and my 16 grandchildren for a better relationship with God? No. I have to be rigorously honest. No. Would you give up what you do for a living, John? No. But the only thing I'd be willing to give up is my wooden steering wheel on my Buick. And they looked at me and they said, well, he's 6th on your list, John. So is God everything? I said, how do you make God everything? How do you think you do that? You ask, dear God, take me to a place. This is another 4th-step prayer, or the 2nd-step prayer. Take me to a place where A, B, C, D, and E are less important than a better relationship with you. Thank you. And I was to say that every day. And one day they told me that I'd be walking outside, going to work, and it would hit me like a ton of bricks. What God did for me is he removed my fear of losing any of those 5 things that was on my list. And God became number 1. And if I don't make God number 1, I wouldn't be speaking to you today. I'd have pulled that trigger. I'd have got out of that emotional pain. I duplicated everything that book told us to do. Everything. Tried to do exactly what the original people did. And when I got through with that, it takes about 25 weeks to do that. My life changed. And for the better part of the last 18 and a half years, I can't tell you the last time I was angry at anyone. I can't tell you that that I held a resentment for more than 5 minutes against anyone. My life had materially changed only because I tried to do exactly what the original people did. And if you haven't done that, guess what they call that? It's right over there. Half measure. And if I continue to do a half measure, I'm either going to drink again, or they're going to put me away someplace, or I'm going to off myself somehow. So that's how I got here. Is any Al-Anons in the room? All right. Love the Al-Anon ladies and men. This is a story about the Al-Anon farmer's wife. This lady's husband was not doing too well on the farm. He drank too much, and he'd fall off the tractor, and they wasn't getting the crops properly planted, and she didn't know what to do with him. So she took his ass to the doctor. And they did every kind of test you can imagine on this guy. The multiphasic, whatever they call that stuff, and took x-rays and blood work, and at the end of the day, the doctor called the wife in. And she said, "What's wrong with my husband, doctor?" The doctor says, "We have determined that he suffered from severe stress." She says, "Well, what can I do?" "Well, here's the plan to help him. Get him up early in the morning, and you have to be up about an hour before he does, and fix him a sumptuous breakfast of his favorite eggs and sausage, whatever he loves for breakfast. And then send him out onto his tractor for the farm work, and bake a pie for him, and bring him a piece of pie and about 10 o'clock in the morning. And then when he comes in for supper at noon, you have made his favorite food that he loves to eat, and then take another piece of pie to him in the afternoon, and then come back and prepare a sumptuous dinner. And when he comes in off the farm for his work, put him in his easy chair and feed him a nice. And if you'll do that for 60 days, he should be fine." And they get back in the car, and they're going to back to the farm. And her husband looks at her and said, "What did the doctor say?" She looked at him and said, "You're going to die." I would like to personally compliment every person that came to this podium. Our beautiful speakers, the readers, the chairman, everybody. Nobody was an ANDA. You know what an ANDA is? That's what I was taught to do when I was in the treatment center. And my sponsor was dragging me to meetings for 6 months. First thing he'd do when we go to the meeting, he'd go up to the chairman and say, "Don't call on him, he doesn't know shit." So I couldn't talk. 6 months sober, he finally let me talk when I was called on. And the first words out of my mouth were, "My name is John, and I'm an alcoholic and an addict." And he picked up an ashtray and threw it at me. He said, "This is Alcoholics Anonymous. Don't disrespect this program." And then he told me this story that he got from his sponsor, Ray O'Keefe. And I love this, and this will piss a few of you off, but that's tough. In New York City alone, there are over 500 different 12-step programs. People who hate their mother-in-law is anonymous. People who cannot stand their Lopsu-Opsu dogs anonymous. There's everything you can think of, and they've got an 800 number you can call. So I call up the 800 number, and the lady says, "Yes, may I help you?" And I can say, "I'm shoving bananas up my ass and I cannot stop." She'll say, "Just a minute. That's Tuesday night at the fire hall. Bring your own bananas." I have beautiful children. My oldest son, I don't know how many treatment centers I dumped him into, try to fix him. And I learned that I can't fix my children. You can. I cannot. And my beautiful son John is, he goes to the other program, Narcotics Anonymous, and I go with him at least once a month. And John just celebrated 8 years clean from heroin. And we've developed into a wonderful father-son relationship. So how much more time we got here? Jeez, 40 minutes. Good Lord. We have to make choices here in Alcoholics Anonymous. And you can diagram on the chart for me, on the board, what choices mean. What do you mean choices? But they told me this story, and I understood what choices really mean for us in Alcoholics Anonymous. The doctor and his wife were at the 35th floor of the bank building downtown Portland, Oregon. They have a nice restaurant there. And their dinner had come, and they were chatting across from one another. And from the entrance to the restaurant comes a beautiful blonde lady. She walks right over to the doctor, kisses him right on the lips, turns around as she walks away, and "I'll see you later tonight, honey." And the wife looks at that, stands up, throws her napkin in her plate, and says, "That's it, I've had it. I'm going to the lawyer in the morning. We're getting a divorce." And her husband looks at her and said, "I would feel the same way if the tables were reversed. But let me tell you what's going to happen when you go to that lawyer. You know, the $10,000 a month they give you for spending money, that's going to go away. You'll get some money, of course, but it won't be that much. And that condo in Portugal that you love to spend 3 months out of the year, well, that's going to have to be sold. And you'll get part of the money, but it won't be like you like to go to. And you know, the condo in Maui, that's going to have to be sold too. And that Jaguar you drive, you know, you'll get the Jaguar, but I don't know if you have enough money to keep that thing running. And about this time comes through the door their friend Jim. And Jim had a beautiful redheaded lady on his arm, not his wife. And his wife looks at the doctor and said, "What's with Jim?" And he said, "Oh, that's his mistress." And his wife sits there for a moment, and she looks at her husband, and she says, "Ours is prettier." Choices. We have to make choices sometimes, and it's not always the best thing that we can do. But, there was, I was over in England and putting on I do a 3-day taking people back through our book, and I get to talk for just about 8 hours a day for 3 days. And in order to encourage those sober folks there to try to duplicate what's in our book. And You know, when Bill was in the First World War, he was a captain in the Army, and he got assigned to the tank brigade in England. And it was about 5 miles up a dirt road, and he was very, very afraid that he was going to get killed while in that war. And he wandered down the road, and there was this magnificent Winchester Cathedral. And he said he wandered in, and he had wanted and needed God. And then he says he came. And when he went outside, he went to this little, I knew I was going to forget the name, cemetery, where these big stones were in front of the cathedral. And he put his hand on the largest stone and looked at the other side, and it was the stone for the Hampshire Grenadier that's on this first page of Bill's story in our book. And I asked the gentleman who was squiring me around in England how far away the Winchester Cathedral was. And they told me that it would take about 3 hours to get there. And they very graciously put me in the car and drove me to that Winchester Cathedral. And I wandered inside. And at that time in my life, I had needed and wanted God. And he came. And I went outside and I saw that same Hampshire Grenadier headstone. And they took a picture of me standing by that stone. And if anybody ever gets the chance to go into our history, and if you're ever in England, don't miss the Winchester Cathedral. It has been a sobering way for me to explain to people what about God and our program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I've got that picture, and it's on the wall in the meeting room in my office. So when I was over there, I heard this story. And I don't know what principle this does, but I just love the story. And it was a drunk like us who was not sober. And he was down on his luck, and it was in the wintertime. And he was gather up papers around the city and so he could put it inside of his shirt. And he wouldn't freeze at night. And he had to sleep on a cement bench underneath by the Thames River underneath an overpass. And as he was laying down to sleep that night, in his mind's eye, he saw this white Silver Cloud Rolls Royce pull up. And the driver got out and let this beautiful lady out of the back of the Rolls Royce. And she comes over to him and looks at him and says, "My good man, do you have to stay here?" And he said, "Yes, my lady, I do. I don't have a job and I don't have any money." And she says, "I won't have it. I'm going to have my chauffeur take you back to the estate and put you up in the East Wing and give you some new clothes and a hot meal and a nice night in a bed. Would you allow me to do that?" And he said, "Oh, my lady, that would be just wonderful." And they did. They took him back to the East Wing and got him some new clothes and a nice meal. And the beautiful lady was a little restless that night. And she wandered over to the East Wing and knocked on his door, and he said, "Yes, it's your hostess." And she opened the doors, and she was framed against the light. Beautiful lady in a beautiful negligee. And he said, "Oh, I see were the clothes all right?" She said, "Oh, they were wonderful, my lady." "And was the meal acceptable?" And he said, "It was delicious, and I thank you so much." And is the bed okay? And he said, "It's so nice, and I don't know how to thank you." And she said, "Well, would you like some company?" And he said, "Oh, my goodness, my lady, I'd love some company." And as she walked into the room toward his bed, he pulled the covers over to let her in and scooted over and fell into the river. That's going to sit on the bar stool, and you're going to go to Someday Isle, wherever that is. So, right now, I am in the 100th group. I dedicated myself in this program of Alcoholics Anonymous once those four guys took me back through our book, one gold-filled page at a time. And I tried the best I could to duplicate what those original people did. And I got the results they described. I started with one group, and then it went to 2 groups a week, and it takes about 25 weeks, and then it went to 3 groups a week. And then I got tired, and I cut back to 1 a week, and now I'm back up to 2. And the group that we're doing now started with 51 people, and it's down to 23. We lose a lot when it gets toward the 4th step. And I'd like to ask you guys a question. What are you supposed to do in the 5th step of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous? Do what?
Share your 4th step with another person.
Share your 4th step. Wrong. That's a great answer, but it's not. What are we doing in the 5th step? Huh? Admit to God what? What do they mean by that? Your secrets. That's what we do in the 5th step. That's what they say 3 times in those 2 pages. I got to bring God into the room and another human being and tell that God and that other human being those 3, 4, 5, 6, or one thing that I was never going to tell anybody for as long as I live. It's the secret step. And it says, if I don't do that, I will drink again. It's not a regurgitation of your 4th step. It's getting rid of our secrets. And if you're holding on to a secret, good luck. I'll tell you one. When I was in high school, I told you about drinking that rock and rye that night and the things I was going to be. Well, I became all those things. I became a world-class athlete. I was a member of the 1960 U.S. Olympic team. And I had my shots, and we were going to go to Italy. And I was a swimmer and the goalie on the water polo team. And I got arrested. Seems as how there was a mistake going around the community I lived in. What I was doing was I would invite myself into your house without being asked and borrow shit that didn't belong to me. And in California, they still call that first-degree burglary. And I pled guilty to several felonies. I was 18 years of age, an official adult. And a female judge in Orange County, California, sentenced me to 18 months in the state penitentiary in Chino. Anybody ever been to Chino? All right. And I wasn't there very long because my lawyer, who I didn't even know, found out that the correct application can be made. You can get out of prison and go into the military. So I did. Went into the Air Force. I figured that was the least onerous of the military. And I ended up on a Navy ship in Da Nang Bay in the early 60s. And for a drunk like me, I was a piano player. Everybody buys a piano player a drink. And I could, if I had to buy my own, I could stay drunk 24 hours a day for 75 cents. Get a double rum and Coke for a nickel. And the only claim to fame I have, I was the house band for all the celebrities they brought over from Hollywood for the guys that were getting their ass shot off up country, and they'd come back for a week before they went back up there. And I met all the comedians, Bob Hope and Red Skelton, all the old guys, and some of those beautiful actresses. And I was late getting to the stage, and there was a lady that wanted me to come back to the dressing room to get her charts, that she was going to be singing a little bit. And so I went back and I barged through the dressing room door, and I'm the only guy in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous that has ever seen Marilyn Monroe completely naked. And not bad, I'll tell you, not bad. And that was a great time. When I got out of the military, I went back to college and moved to Oregon and went to law school. And my first job as a lawyer after I passed the bar examination was prosecuting drunk drivers in Clackamas County, Oregon. And I found the bars that the people that drank like I did, and all of them were the muckety-mucks in town. And I drank my way onto the bench to become a judge. And I could remember guys would be standing in front of me, and I would arraign them for their first, second, or third driving under the influence case. And I knew that I should be out there. How many had favorite bars that they liked to go into? Oh, yeah. I had a place in Gladstone, Oregon. It's no longer there because I got sober and they went broke. And I'd run down there at noon, and I'd go in the men's room, and I had a bottle of red mouthwash behind the toilet. Never dawned on me that that wasn't very clean. So I'd go in and have 4 or 5 pops of whatever the hell I was drinking to get back to the court. And I'd go in the bathroom, pull out the bottle, take a big slug of it, wash it around in my mouth, and go out. And first stoplight, I'd open the door and spit all this red stuff out onto the roadway. And last time I did that, one of the other judges was in the car behind me. And it was no secret that I was a drunk, but nobody wanted to do anything about it. So that became my ritual, drinking every day during the day, trying to do the best I could as a judge. And I couldn't, for the last 3 years, I tried everything you can think of, everything that's in chapter 3 of all the things we tried. I tried all of them to not drink. And I couldn't not drink. I just couldn't do it. If I made it 3 days, it was a miracle. And so, how much time we got left? Anybody know? Hour and a half? Well, I got a couple of other things for you. How many of you have been secretary of your home group? Don't you love that? I was secretary of my first home group in Canby, Oregon. And they give you a piece of paper and a pencil, and you can write shit down. And the newcomers think you're something. And so I decided, because I'm nuts as I am, that I was going to write down every AA phrase I ever heard, every bumper sticker I ever saw, every phrase that was on the walls of clubs and regular AA meetings. And I decided one day that I was going to write all of these phrases and make one sentence about it. And I sent this into the Grapevine, and I don't remember when, a long time ago. But I got another project I'm going to tell you about in a minute. So this is what I call the AA phrases in one sentence. Here we go. One day at a time, I keep it simple. Well, I let go and let God, because without God, I don't have a prayer, because I can't and He can, and I think I'll let Him. And you'll love me until I can learn to love myself when I suit up and show up and share my experience, strength, and hope. And I don't drink, and I go to meetings, and I don't worry, because worry is an insult to God. And if you ain't the lead dog, the scenery never changes. And Alcoholics Anonymous lets me live and let live to not get too hungry, angry, baffling, and powerful. And if I pick up the phone before I pick up a drink, I'll stay happy, joyous, and free. To see the light at the end of the tunnel, which I know today is the sunlight of the Spirit, and not an oncoming train. Where I sought the relief from the compulsion to drink, and I need to think, but with me it's with what? And I don't ever have to take another drink if I don't want to, and I had to keep it simple to know that if I didn't drink, I wouldn't get drunk. So I then knew to just do the next dumb thing so my life would be higher powered. Because I was trying to learn that today is a tomorrow that I worried about yesterday, because I have to surrender my will and my life in order to know the proper exercise of my will, because the results of my life are none of my blanking business, because I have been farther up a tree in life than most people have been away from home, for when I develop an attitude of gratitude, because nothing changes if nothing changes, and I remember that wherever I go, there I am. And if it's bad now, a drink will make it worse, because life may not be the party we hope for, but while we're here, we might as well dance, for AA is really the easier, softer way, so one day at a time, I keep coming back. So that's the... And you've all been to meetings where they ask one of the newcomers to read a portion of chapter 5. And they usually screw it up somehow. Do you remember any of those? Well, I started writing all those down. And this is almost ready to be sent into the Grapevine. And it's called Chapter 5, Mistakes Along the Way. If I can find this here. There it is. You ready for this one? Barely have we seen a person frail who has thoroughly fouled our path. Those who do not recover are people who can or will complimentary give themselves to this single program. Usually men and women who are unconstitutionally inescapable of being dishonest with themselves. There are such fortunates. They are at fault. They scream to have been born that way. They are naturally inescapable of gasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigor and honesty. Their changes are less than average. There are those, too, who suffer from brave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them don't recover if they have the capacitor to be honest. Our stories dispose in a generous way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like new. If you have decried you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you are rarely to take certain steps. At some of these we bawled, B-A-W-L-E-D. We taught we could find an Easter softly way. But we could. With all the earliest at our command, we beg of you to be fearful and thorough from the very start. Some of us have fried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was ill until we let go absolutely. That one's pretty true there. Remember that we feel with alcohol. Stunning, shunning, battling, and powderful. With help, it is too much for us. But there is one who has all the powder. That one is God. May you find him now. Here are the steps we tool, which are segregated as a program of recovery. 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our wives had become unimaginable. 2, came to relieve that a power greater than ourselves could store us in sanctity. I have no idea what that means. 3, made a mission to turn our will and our lives over to the chair of God as we understood him. 4, made a searing and fruitless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact natural in our wrongs. 6, we're tirelessly ready to have God renew all these defects of character. 7, humbly ask him to renew our shortcomings. 8, I love this one, made a fist of all persons we had armed and became willing to make them all. 9, made direct depends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them for others. 10, continued to take personal inventing, and when we were long, promptly admitted it. And the fruit one, 11, shot through pears and medication to improve our conscious contact with God as we misunderstood him, flailing only for his knowledge of his will for us and the powder to carry that out. 12, having had a spiritual anchoring. As the result of these steps, we cried to carry this mess to alcoholics and to practice these princes in all our attires. So that's almost ready to be sent to the grapevine. So. You know, wisdom in the program Alcoholics Anonymous can come from people who are newly sober. I don't know if you've ever looked at this and where it came from, but it's entitled AA as a Spirit. Anybody ever read that? I know Mike has back there. This was written by the first secretary of the first registered group in Texas in 1941. This secretary had 6 months of sobriety. And this is what he wrote, and it's in the AA archives now. AA is a spirit. It cannot be touched, nor can it be completely understood. It is as wide as the world, yet small enough to fit snugly into the mind and heart of a man. It has brought light where only darkness dwelt. It has given hope to the helpless and help to those who yearned in despair. It has nourished forgiveness in those who know no pity. It has given strength to the weak and humility to the strong. It has given greatness to the common man. It has spurred to higher goals those who strove for nothing. It has brought to the destitute a home. It has transformed sorrow into a weapon of happiness. It has given purpose to the trackless and shelter to the lost. It has taught patience to the hurried and action to the slothful. To youth it has given vision. To the aged, promise. To the lonely, many companions. To the restless, it has given rest. To the sick, it has been a doctor. To the dying, it has revived the desire to live. To those who have fallen, it has been a helping hand up. It has no judgment against the unteachable, nor has it praise for those who learn. To the outcast, it has been a family. To the childless, it has given many children. To the ignorant, wisdom. To the wise, tolerance. It is given to all that which is most precious in Alcoholics Anonymous. It is given love for truth with enough left over to share with one another. From the first secretary of the first registered group in Texas, at 6 months sober, April of 1941. And I love stuff like that. Well, you guys, I want to thank you very, very much. I close the same way, and I will do it as I always do. This has been called many things. I call it the auctioneer. And this is the way I close every time I get the good grace to come and speak with folks. The auctioneer walked over to the table and he picked up an old violin. It was all battered and scarred and covered with dust. And he held it aloft and said, "What am I bid for the old violin?" And $1 came, then $2, then $3. But before he could say sold, said he, from the back of the room came an old man, shuffling through, who was all battered and scarred like the old violin. And he picked up the violin from the auctioneer and began to tighten its bow. And he set the violin to his chin and he began to play. And a melody came forth such as the angels sing. And he handed the violin back to the auctioneer, who held it aloft and said, "What am I now bid for the old violin?" And $1,000, then $2,000, then $3. "Sold," said he. And another voice from the crowd said, "What changed the value of the old violin?" And another voice said it was the touch of the hand of the master. And I submit to you, in my speaking around the world, I have met over and over and over again the still suffering alcoholic who's been made happy, joyous, and free simply and solely by the touch of the hand of our master. Thank you very much.